Welcome to SNN Live. We're broadcasting from our studios in Los Angeles, California. I'm Shelley Kraft, and today we have on our program Dr. Amit Kumar from ITUS Corporation. It's a publicly traded company, and the symbol is ITUS on NASDAQ. I want to welcome you to SNN Live, Doctor.
Thank you, Shelley, for having me.
It's good to have you. Let's get started with an overview on ITUS, and then we'll go from there.
As you noted, Shelley, ITUS is a publicly traded company listed on NASDAQ. We're a biotech company developing a very exciting new technology for early cancer detection.
Now, what's the history behind this company a little bit?
ITUS is a company that's been around for almost 3 decades. It was previously called Copytel, but about 4 years ago, a group of us got involved and repositioned the company. And about 2 years ago, we brought it back onto NASDAQ and turned it into a biotechnology company that's developing this new technology for early cancer detection.
Okay. Early detection of any disease is incredibly important, particularly in cancer. How does your technology work? How do you provide these results?
That's a very good question, Shelley. As we all know, millions of people annually are diagnosed with cancer, and millions of them die annually because of that cancer, primarily because most of those people are diagnosed at a late stage. We know from statistics and studies that early diagnosis enables a much better outcome for the patient as well as for the healthcare system. So early detection is critical for survival of the patient. Now, our technology works by measuring the subtle changes in the immune system in response to a tumor. As you know, typically when there's an infection in the body, the immune system mobilizes to attack that infection, like a bacterial infection, for example, and the white blood cell count increases dramatically. When there's a tumor in the body, however, the white blood cell count does not increase dramatically, primarily for 2 reasons. One, the tumor cells, although they're detrimental and they're disease cells, they came out of our own cells, and so the immune system has a little bit of a difficult time recognizing it. Secondly, tumors have developed this a number of unique mechanisms to try and suppress the immune system in order for them to survive. And so the immune system, while it's battling, is not battling as aggressively as it is in an infection situation. However, there are subtle changes in the immune system when a tumor exists in a human body. And we measure those changes in circulating blood and identify specific patterns based on the frequency and the types of white blood cells that are circulating to identify patients that are tumor-bearing versus patients who don't have a tumor.
What's the intricacies? What do you use as that intricate science in the middle of all of that?
Well, it's the response of the immune system. We know that there are numerous types of white blood cells, and the frequency and the type of white blood cells that are circulating in a patient that has a tumor are different than the frequency and the types of blood cells that are circulating in a patient that is healthy. And we are able to use technology called flow cytometry to monitor those cells, as well as artificial intelligence to establish the underlying patterns that are indicative of a tumor.
What's your background?
I'm a research scientist, Shelley. I studied for my PhD at Stanford University and the California Institute of Technology. I received my PhD at Caltech in 1991. I did a 2-year fellowship at Harvard University after that. And since that time, I've been working in the biotech industry as a research scientist, eventually a CEO, and sat on a number of boards. But I'll say this, one thing that is critical, that is a motivation factor for me, is that we've all been touched by cancer. And this is not just a job for me, it's a passion.
Amit, where was this technology developed?
Well, the technology was developed internally at ITUS. It's a technology that I've been thinking about for many years. In a previous company where I was the CEO, we were developing a number of technologies to help patients who had already been diagnosed with cancer to try and determine what's the best treatment option for them. That whole area of science is called personalized medicine or precision medicine. What I realized was that even if our technology at that time was helpful to those patients, we were providing them an additional short period of increased life expectancy. And I realized that a better way to address those patients was to catch that cancer earlier and hence enable a better outcome for the patient and our healthcare system. And I'm not the only one that came to that realization. However, it's only been recently, in the last few years, that we've gained enough of an understanding of biology and immunology for us to develop technologies that can do early cancer detection.
Is there a university or a hospital component to this company?
That's right. Once we developed the technology and the concept and the idea, we took it to a number of university collaborators and hospital collaborators. So we're working with the Wistar Institute, which is a NCI cancer center. We're working with the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, MD Anderson, Virtual Hospital Systems, and a number of other collaborators.
Let's discuss clinical trials, if we could. Why don't you go into that?
Yeah. First, I think it's important to note that our technology is already being used with human patients. This is not an early stage research in the lab technology. That being said, we're at the early stages of the clinical development. We anticipate in the next few months developing a critical mass of data that we will then take to the FDA and develop a plan for clinical trials that will enable us, we feel, to get regulatory approval. We anticipate that whole process will take about 2 years, plus or minus, but it could be earlier, it could be a little bit later, but that's roughly the time frame.
And, you know, most people might think that that's a short time, but in terms of you being, I guess, a medical device versus, you know, a medicine or a drug, let's speak to that a minute, because I think it would form, you would go in as seeking 510K approval, correct?
That's right. We would be seeking approval as a medical device. We're not putting anything inside the body, and so the process of development, clinical development for a drug is significantly longer, and that's why we think we can get onto the market within a matter of 2 years or so.
Is it designed for all or most tumors?
Well, our initial studies indicate that we're able to see the patterns indicative of multiple tumor types. Every tumor type that we've looked at, we're able to see a pattern. The expectation is that it will work for all tumor types, because if you remember, we're not looking at the tumor itself. We're looking at the subtle changes in our immune system that respond to the tumor. So whether you have a tumor in your breast or your prostate or your colon, we anticipate that the immune system is mobilized to attack that tumor, and that's what we're measuring. So we anticipate that it'll work for all, multiple if not all tumor types.
So, doctor, can your test determine what stage 1, 2, 3, or 4 the cancer is?
Yes, we anticipate that it will be able to identify the stage. What we're going for is as early detection as possible. In our studies, we've used all stages of cancer, as stage 1 all the way up to stage 4, and we are able to see patterns indicative of that.
So, doctor, I want to ask this question. I think it's an important question. In today's use by medicine, doctors, et cetera, there are tests on the market. There's PSA, there's biopsies. How does your test fit in to that scope of testing?
That's a good question, Shelley. Eventually, we want this test to be used for routine screening. So when an individual goes to his or her physician for an annual physical, the physician will run this test to evaluate whether there's a malignancy growing in the body. However, initially, our goal is to use this test as a pre-biopsy, or another term is a confirmatory test. For example, today we have existing screening tests like PSA as an example. When a PSA test is run and the patient's PSA scores are high and rising, the doctor will typically ask the patient to come in for a biopsy. However, what we know from studies by the American Cancer Society and American Medical Association is that 80% plus of those prostate biopsies are negative and were unnecessary. What we want to use this test for is a biopsy verification test. So we will run this test after a high PSA indicates a biopsy is necessary, but before the biopsy is done, to try and eliminate as many of those biopsies as possible, unnecessary biopsies as possible.
You know, I have another question that stems from this, and that is, so let's say a patient has already been through a cancer operation.
Yes.
Would this test be useful for that patient post that operation?
Yes. In fact, that's called recurrence testing. So a patient that has already been treated for cancer and has survived, and the cancer is in remission, is a high likelihood now for that patient to have a recurrence of that cancer. And typically when a recurrence occurs, it's very aggressive. So you want to catch that even more importantly as early as possible than a patient who's never had cancer. So we anticipate that this would be a great test for recurrence monitoring and evaluating periodically whether that patient cancer is coming back.
And at the same time, it may have metastasized, so it may have moved from its original, location too, right?
That's correct. Metastatic cancer is typically what causes death, and organ failure and death eventually. And so we want to catch the cancer long before it's metastasized.
And it also stands to reason that in today's healthcare cost dilemma, that a blood test to determine whether or not a person has cancer is going to be reasonably less expensive than a biopsy, and I just want to clear that up.
Absolutely. Our blood test is designed to be relatively modest in expense, and it's designed to be very easy for the patient, whereas a biopsy is expensive, it's painful, very difficult for the patient, and it's very risk-laden. There are chances of infection and other side effects whenever you put a probe or a knife into a human body.
So, doctor, let's take a step back a minute and do a real focus on the fact that the test is non-invasive.
Yeah, that's a very critical component of our technology, Shelley. We are developing this test so it's non-invasive and very simple for the patient, a simple blood draw. If you look at all of the various screening technologies we have on the market today, like mammography or PSA or colonoscopy, we note that tests like colonoscopy, while it's a fantastic test, are not used as frequently as they should be because they're very difficult for the patient. However, tests like PSA testing, which is not a very good test, and in fact, there's a lot of controversy about whether PSA should even be used as a screening test. PSAs are used more frequently than all of the other screening tests combined because it's non-invasive. When the physician says, I want to run a PSA test on you, the patient says, what does that involve? And the physician says, a simple blood draw. The patient says, okay. When a physician says, I want to run a colonoscopy on you, the patient says, what does that involve? Or he or she already knows what that involves and has a hesitation about whether he or she wants to do that. So we felt that for purposes of better acceptance by patients and physicians, that this test has to be very simple for them. And a simple blood draw is all it requires from the patient.
In most cases, they're getting blood drawn anyway, right?
That's correct. Most cases, they're getting blood drawn for standard routine testing.
Let's talk about management. All right? Most investors are always curious about the management team of a company.
Yeah, we have a very strong management team. It's compact and small. It's myself with over 25 years of experience in biotechnology and cancer. I'm running the company as well as driving the technology along with our partners in academia. We have a seasoned biotech executive, Mike Catalini, as a as our Chief Operating Officer and CFO. And we have a very seasoned engineering executive, John Roop, who is running our artificial intelligence capabilities.
Okay, let's get your website out there for our investor audience, if you would.
Thank you, Shelley. Our website is www.ituscorp.com, ITUScorp.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Amit Kumar, ITUS Corporation. It's a publicly traded company on NASDAQ, and the symbol is ITUS. This is SNNLive. We're broadcasting to you from our studios in Los Angeles, California, and I'm Shelley Kraft. Amit, thanks for coming on to SNNLive.
Thank you very much, Shelley.
You're welcome.